All right, video number 3, we're going over plant and fungi diversification, and we're going to talk about plants here. From this PowerPoint, there are 11 questions on your exam. And this is the one where we talked about our non-vascular, our vascular seedless, our gymnosperms, and our angiosperms. So we made a nice little table for these, and we had our non-vascular seedless plants. Then we had our vascular seedless plants. Then we had our gymnosperms and our angiosperms. When we talked about each of these, we should remember that we started with these, our non-vascular seedless ones were our first plants on Earth, and then now we are to the point of our angiosperms being our dominant ones. We still have all of the different types of plants, but our non-vascular seedless were evolutionarily the first plants that were there. And our non-vascular seedless plants, we also know them as bryophytes. And our examples were mosses and liverworts and hornworts. These plants had no seeds, no vascular system, and no flowers. These plants were short, low to the ground, because they didn't have any way of transporting water. They barely had any roots or anything to them. They had to be close to water, and they actually used the water as a method of moving their spores. Since they didn't have seeds, they had spores, and those spores moved by water. Let's see. Oh, they had an alternation of generations for their life cycle. And in that alternation of generations, they had a dominant gametophyte, which meant that they spent most of their life as haploid with one set of chromosomes. Our vascular seedless plants, our examples that we had for those were ferns and horsetails. And I think there might have been one other thing, but if we know these, ferns and horsetails. They also had no seeds, but they do have a vascular system. And that was our xylem and phloem for water transport. They still had no flowers, and they were still pretty short comparatively. They also had spores, but their spores could be spread by wind, and they also have an alternation of generations. But they had a dominant sporophyte. Spelled that wrong. Sporophyte. Which meant their dominant form was diploid. And when that diploid was ready to make spores, it would go from diploid to haploid spores. This one is haploid. Then we talked about gymnosperms, and we gave an example here of conifers. Those were our best example are our pine trees. They did have seeds, and their reproductive structures were found in cones. They do have a vascular system. They still have no flowers. They could be much taller. They were also able to move away from water. They don't have the alternation of generation, but we did learn about seeds and how our seeds have endosperms. for nutrition. Then we talked about angiosperms, and our examples here were any flowering plants. They have seeds, and their seeds can often be found in fruits. They do have a vascular system. They do have flowers, and they can be any height. They could be tall or short. Also able to move away from water, also have the endosperms. These are the most dominant plant type on Earth now. All right, there's our differences, and our non-vascular seedless and our vascular seedless. All right, we're gonna skip to a couple slides. Oh, there was just a picture of them so you could see those. Here we go. When we're looking at our moss life cycle, remember these were our part of our non-vascular seedless ones. So they have spores. And on your test, you are going to see this diagram, and it wants you to be able to recognize the parts of the diagram. Specifically, it wants you to recognize the embryo here, which part of the plant or the moss life cycle is that, and that is the embryo. Then on your test, it also wants you to be able to recognize the characteristics of plants. That plants have to be able to create their own food, their autotrophs, that they are sessile and not really moving, and that they are multicellular. So be able to pick those off the list. It also wants you to recognize that stems and leaves are important to the plants, and that's where the leaves are where the photosynthesis happens. Then we talked on this slide about some problems that plants had, and one of the problems was desiccation or drying out. So the plants got an adaptation called a cuticle that prevents them from drying out. All right, here's a picture of our seed and our seed structure. There's the endosperm right here that's useful for providing nutrition to the plant. So there's for food storage. And then this one. No. Gymnosperms have cones. Let's see. Oh, here it is, back here on this slide. Our gymnosperms have cones, and that's their reproductive structure. And I think that's it from this one. Make sure you go back and you study this table. Make sure you know this table backwards and forwards, because a lot of your questions are about this table, but in an indirect manner. So you can't just memorize that non-vascular seeds have spores that move by water without also paying attention to the methods of movement for other ones. So spores in vascular seedless move by wind, and then the seeds over here, I guess we should write that down. Seeds spread by the fruits, and then seeds here, those were the on our cones there, they spread by wind. Okay, make sure you pay attention to that chart and know it backwards and forwards.